But welcome, fellow haters. Let's kill the microservices hype. This is my favorite talk to give because I work for Red Hat, and Red Hat is all about microservices. That's all they talk about. And so I said, well, somebody has to stand up, be the voice in the crowd that says you're full of microservices, and we need to not do that. How many people in here are doing microservices? I just came here for the, so you all are. This is awesome. I'm just looking for the exit. And good morning, and I can run faster scared than you can mad. So this is my talk about killing the microservices hype. So the first thing is, well, there's this, and I just thought this was an appropriate quote about the microservices talk. And as you'll see later, this fits with a lot of other things, you'll see. And so, why should you listen to me? Well, one, because I submitted a talk and it got accepted. No, one, because I work for Red Hat and we're all about microservices, so I have all this insight into microservices and drilled into my head all the time about this is how you do things, this is how it's supposed to be done, and blah, 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 blah. But more importantly, I've been at this, I've been in IT for 40 years. I know I started when I was 4, and I've seen everything. I have literally seen everything. I was at the party last night talking to a fellow. We were talking about System 360 mainframes and that I programmed in assembler. And he was a developer on that. I've seen every possible development trend come and go in the last 40 years. And so I think that gives me a little bit of insight into some of this stuff. And I have a strong sense of a BS detector, if you know what I mean, and it's starting to go off lately. So, anybody remember this? Of course not. No one in here is even old enough. But back in around 1988, I'm going to say, IBM came out with this thing called the AD cycle, the Application Development Cycle. And it was the hot thing. It's so bad that I had to find a picture of it from a Japanese website because it's been like forgotten. But it meant that you could take your code and run it on an IBM mid-range or an IBM mainframe, and you had all these tools that were supposed to work across every kind of platform, and it was just going to solve everything. And one of the key ones is this, if you just right there, case. Anybody familiar with case? This is so good that nobody's like, what's that? That's perfect. 30 years from now, someone's going to mention microservices, and you're going to have somebody go, what's that? Trust me, it's going to happen. Because you don't remember this, and this was the shizzle. I mean, this was a big deal. Now you can't even find a picture of it. So, okay, great. That's just great. How about this? Case tools. Nope, nobody remembers them. This was the thing back in the late 80s and early 90s. Computer-aided software engineering. Or as my friend Paul called it, contrived attempt to sell everything. A case tool is where you had a desktop tool with a mouse and you could draw pictures and then you could generate software and then you could change the software and it would change the picture, and the computer helped you build code. And you worked at an abstract layer. You didn't have languages. You kind of typed in English and it would transform it into the language you were using. In my case, it was, anybody ever heard of RPG, not role-playing games, but RPG, there's a language called RPG that was the worst language ever invented. All uppercase, variable names were limited to 6 characters. It was, at the beginning there was no if-then statement. It was horrible. And I had the best, by the way, this is not in here, but I had the best horror story in software ever. No one could top this. I was given an RPG program that when printed on green bar paper, the wide paper with the green bars, some of you are like, what's that? 14 7/8 by 11. When I printed it, it was 800 pages long. This is one program. And I was asked to change something. There was an if-then statement that ran 200 pages. And I was supposed to figure out what was wrong with it. That is the worst, hardest story. Never did. I never did. You couldn't. But case tools, that was like the big thing. You gotta have case tools. And people spent tens of thousands of dollars on these things. Like $50,000 for a software tool for your 6 developers. And now where is it? Yeah, great. Anybody remember this? Some of you still doing this? Service-oriented applications, service-oriented architecture. You have the different layers, data access layer, the business layer. You put your logic here, and then data access layer was no logic. And do you put stuff here, or do you use a lot of stored procedures? These were the arguments we had. These were big arguments. And this was the thing. And this was back in when? Early, mid-90s, SOA. Nobody remembers it. Is anybody doing this? If you are, I would suggest you might find a new employer. So what's that? What am I hearing?
Our software is.
Well, it's not so much the layers, it's this right here, this tag. Oh, service-oriented architecture. You gotta do, you're not doing SOA? What's wrong with you? Well, we don't need to. We're using HTML. No, you gotta do all this stuff. How about this? Now we're starting to like hit some nerves, right? This was the thing, man. You had to have there was actually something really good about this. And when you had this WSDL, right? Which was really great as a developer because I was working in a bank and they had all their stuff was in Visual Basic. That should make you wonder about your banking. But everything was done in Visual Basic. But the cool thing was, once somebody developed a service, you could link, like you could type in the URI, and then Visual Basic, you had IntelliSense for all the parameters. It was just like calling a function from a DLL. Does that ring a bell with anyone? It was really slick, actually, because you're in the IDE, and you're like, oh, hey, there's a service out there.
It was the best thing that happened. You didn't need to read the man page. It was right there for you.
Right, you didn't have to read the man page. This is where it all should have ended, right? This was the best thing ever. Just like that was the best thing ever, and that was the best thing ever, and that was the best thing ever. These are the cutting edge. You could argue that there's an evolution, but at the time, the hype for this was as big as microservices now. This was what you had to do. And then WSDL, which goes right along with that. Anyone here not familiar with? Don't be ashamed. Like, you should be proud. I don't know what that is. Web Services Design Language, is that right? What it stood for? It was just a specification that said, here's your service and here are the parameters. Anybody know anything like that now? It's called gRPC. I spoke about that at some conferences, which is really slick, but it's like, someone said, it's just like WSDL. I'm like, but it's better because it's new. Remember this? Behind the back. This was the greatest thing ever. Object-oriented programming. Man, this solves everything. Everything's an object. This is an object. It's got functions. It's turn on and off. It's got pointers. Set pointer to true or on, pointer off, page up, page down. This is an object. Everything's an object. How could this not be the be-all and end-all of software? Seriously, how is this not the end of it? Everything in the universe is an object. So this has to be the end. So everyone in here is doing this now, right? We're all doing object-oriented programming, right? No, we're not. Not in the sense when it came out and how it was like, this is the way. But we've kept parts of it, right? That's key. And then who remembers this? Does anybody in here remember this? Come on. This was, do you remember what this stands for, DNA? Distributed Network Architecture. You had N-tier, because remember the SOA, you had the business layer and a lot. Then we had arguments, how many tiers? Where do you put stuff? How many layers? Like, where do you put the business logic? And so we had these arguments or discussions. COM+, anybody remember that? And MTS, Microsoft Transaction Server. This was how you did web development in 1998. And it was really slick. You create a DLL and you could share code or a library. Now they call it an assembly. It's a DLL. N-tier, you could put your logic wherever. COM+ meant you had transactions across all your assemblies. You could start a commit. You could start a transaction, do a bunch of stuff, and then commit it. And it would all happen at once or not, right? It was atomic, which is great. Like two-phase commits, with banking, withdrawal and money, and it has to happen two places. So that took care of that. And then Microsoft Transaction Server worked with that. That's actually what did the transactions. So this had to be the end of the line. This had to be. I mean, this works so well, there's no way we could move on from this. And it just was so easy to build web apps and local apps. And I even I used the Win32 API, remember that, to tie into the Active Directory, and to do, when you logged on the app, you actually use your password. This was dynamite. Nothing could be better, except for this. Who uses the UML now? Well, that's odd, no one uses it. Because when this came out, where I was working, they spent $10,000 to train me on the UML. $10,000 just to train me, and there was 4 of us. They spent 40 grand for us to become masters of the unified modeling language. You remember that, where you drew diagrams with, you had objects, and I have forgotten a lot of it, thankfully, but you could not actualize, I can't even remember the terms, but it had its own terminology, its own language, its own tool set. This had to be the best thing ever, because you had pictures and you could compile them, so to speak. I mean, you could just draw a picture and then link them together, and you built relationships, and you could even do many-to-many, which you can't do in a database, technically. So that was, no one remembers it. A few people do, yes. Are you asking a question or saying you remember it? So there's like 4. So now we're starting to get, oh yeah. Are you still using it, right? Because it's so great. No, they're not using it. No one's using it.
A little bit of whiteboarding on occasion, but that's...
Yeah, right. Exactly. We take what we need from it, but it's not the end. But at the time it was. And then, does this ring a bell with anybody? It's not waterfall, it's iterative. It's not waterfall, it's iterative. Look at this. You had to do a business model. I made a change to an application. It was 2 lines of code. It took 3 months to implement it. And we were doing iterative development because it was healthcare, and they had to do what they call software validation. But you had the business model, and hopefully you got things right here. Then you had to do requirements gathering. Has anybody been through that process of requirements gathering? Right? And it was like an official, you have people in a room, you sit down and get requirements. And then you analysis and design, and then implementation. This is great. So I guess that's construction, and testing goes all the way, and then deployment. But this was, iterative development was the way to do it, right? And then you do this over and over and over and over. We had a thing called internet time. Anybody heard that phrase, internet time? That was the same time as that, because you're supposed to do everything quickly, which is like 2 months. AOP, what is that? Aspect-oriented programming. Is everybody doing that again? No? Yes? No? Okay, there's one. This was like the big buzzword. Maybe not as big as the other ones, but this was a big deal. Are you starting to see a trend here? Anyone? And then remember Google Glass? Remember when that was like, this is, oh my gosh, $1,500 and I can take a picture by like talking to it. That's great. But do you remember the hype around Google Glass? Does anybody have Google Glass in here? Actually would think it would be cool. But this was, are we seeing a trend? Are you seeing a trend? And now we're here, microservices. So if we're seeing a trend, why is this not going to be the same way? That's the hype of it all. All these things have come and gone, and yet here we sit, like now it's microservices.
That's how evolution works though, right? We come out of the cave and go to the moon.
Say again?
That's how evolution works, right?
That's how evolution works, correct. And as long as you keep that in mind, it's fine. My experience, or no, the point I'm trying to make is people are hyping it that everyone has to use microservices. And later I'll show you why you're not, or you shouldn't, or you should. But a lot of people that think they are, perhaps aren't, or I'll get to it. But yes, it's an evolution, but don't buy into the hype that this is the end of the line.
So
Because
if you don't buy into the hype, is the alternative simply do the simplest practical thing that works for your organization?
that's a rule in life. but your question, Mr. Ringer, that I brought in, will be answered later in the talk. That's awesome. I love it when you ask questions that I have planned. So now we're here. Ha! Business, yes, great. Everybody wants to stay in business and make money, so we're doing microservices. So who's heard of this? Every hand that did microservices should be up right now. The 12-factor app is the manifesto on microservices. No? So you can, I will not link to it, I will not show it to you, I will let you Google it or Bing it, because that's what half of you are doing right now on your phone or your app, and that's cool, I don't mind. But this is the manifesto about microservices, a 12-factor app. This is how you're supposed to do it, man. This is laying down the law. I don't know who did it, I don't know why, maybe it was Kelsey. Kelsey Hightower, have you heard that name? He is the guru of Kubernetes at Google. He is one of the best speakers, incredibly smart, knows everything about Kubernetes and microservices. He's a genius. And he wrote one about the 12 fractured app. So he had to come back for this. It's pretty good. So these are some things you might want to look up. These are really interesting. So one of the things in the 12-factor app, the first of the 12, is that you're to have one code base. What does that mean? That means you have one place where all your code is. Typically it's in GitHub. You have one repository. Well, that doesn't sound right. That seems a little odd. Whatever, I wish I had my notes, but I do want to make this point. What has happened to reusable code? It's gone. We don't reuse code. You're not supposed to in microservices. You're not supposed to reuse code. That's like forbidden. Because a microservice is supposed to be a vertical application with nothing else outside of it. If you're sharing code with somebody else, that's not a microservice. They are linked, they're intertwined at a level that's higher than just a URI. But one code base for your code. Okay, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's all right. Another one is dependencies. You're supposed to have your dependencies defined in such a way that they're loose, right? And they cannot be, like they won't break your application. Okay, that's just a good software practice. We all do that, whether we know it or not. Unless you use Node. Every time I do npm install, something breaks. And then your configuration data is supposed to be stored with your code base, and I don't remember the other point. I wish I had my notes. But so anyway, your configuration is one of the 12-factor apps. I don't remember, that one's not important. Your backing services, you're supposed to treat backing services like back end, right? Your front end and back end, or your service might call another service. You're supposed to treat them kind of as part of your application. So that's like a mindset, like, well, I have to call this, so this has to work. I know that some of these seem like, well, duh, but when you write a manifesto, you have to put like really cool keywords and write a couple paragraphs to make you sound really smart. And then you read it and you go, well, I'm doing that, but I don't call it that. I just call it making my software work. But so this is not a bad idea. Build, release, and run should be separate things. Well, no fake. I mean, who runs their code by going to Visual Studio and hitting F5 and go, okay, it's working? No, you build it, and then you release it, and then you run it. And if you're working with Docker and Kubernetes, this is really, or OpenShift, which is really great. These are obviously separate steps, right? Build, release, and run. So that's okay, this is a good one. So the 12-factor apps, it's not necessarily so bad. Processes should be independent of each other. No fake, that's what microservices do. A microservice should do one thing. That's it, one thing. Let me give you an example. You have, let's say you run the Amazon.com website. And so people go in there and they search for stuff, right? And then you get a list and you page through and you go page through and you page, and you find the thing you want to look at and you click on the link and you get the page for that thing, right? Let's say you're shopping for sandals. So one microservice would be just the search that says, you give me a term sandals and I'm gonna return a list. That's it, that's one microservice. Then when you click on the item, the next microservice is get item. It gets one item. It doesn't get a list, it gets one item. That would be a separate microservice. And they should be separate because you're getting different kinds of data. The one you're getting much more detail. It would be foolish to get lists of all the detail when you're not showing it all. So CRUD, create, read, update, delete, and list. You should have at least 5 microservices for all your database access. At least 5. At least. If you're doing CRUD in one microservice, that's not a microservice. That's a service. And that's cool. I'm not criticizing you. But this is the hype of microservices is what I'm giving you right now. No, they have to be separate. You can't mix them up. They have to be completely separate. This is drilled in to me at Red Hat every day. You cannot have anything else but one thing. Well, why can't I just have update and delete the same? Nope. In fact, don't do deletes. Okay. Because you got to use events and CQRS, which is what I was doing 30 years ago, but we just called it, we have a separate database for reporting. Now it's CQRS and has a name. Port binding. Your microservices should bind to a port. Okay, great. This is the 12, somebody wrote this like, concurrency and scaling. This is the best part of microservices. Concurrency and scaling. Handling transactions. Hallelujah. And I'm going to get into this later. But your microservices need to support concurrency and they need to scale. Well, yeah, if you're using Kubernetes, they scale. By the way, how many people in here are using Kubernetes? Some, okay. How many people here are running their code in a virtual machine environment? So the rest of you are using bare metal. When I was at Rackspace 6 years ago, the way you scaled an application was you spun up another VM, right? That's how you did it. Like I have a VM at Rackspace and it's running an application. Uh-oh, Black Friday's coming. We'll spin up 5 more VMs running the same code and put a load balancer in front of them. Hey, we're good. And then when they're done, you wipe out the VMs. And there was a phrase of pets versus livestock. Anybody heard that phrase before? So VMs were considered what? Livestock. You didn't name them, you got rid of them. Now we're running Kubernetes on VMs. Now the VM is not livestock. It's like, we don't want the VM to go down because we have Kubernetes running all our applications on there. Do you see what's happened? Now VMs are like kind of permanent. It's like, oh, we don't want to tear down the VM. We want to tear down the pods in Kubernetes. So we keep getting, now VMs are like almost persistent. So another 12-factor app is development through production. You have to have parity. What does that mean? That means the app runs the same way everywhere, right? That's a great thing. That fixes the it works on my machine. So not everything that is in the hype is bad. And logs, all logging should go to one place in microservice heaven, right? In 12-factor app, all logs go to one place. That's it. Central logging. Everybody's doing that? Well, there's one. This is the guy that wrote the 12-factor app. He's going to beat me up after this. And your admin processes, I have no idea what this means, should all be one-offs. Okay, I thought the idea of like automation was that you could do stuff, but in the 12-factor apps, everything should be a one-off. So I guess apparently everything is working, and so if you have to do something special, it's a one-off. I don't even understand what this one means. But this is the hype. If you are reading up and getting force-fed, like I am. And then data. Yes, data. This is the part of microservices no one's talking about. No one's talking about data. Why? It's impossible. It's so hard. I'm going to go into some detail. The data in microservices, if you follow the hype, it will kill you. It will kill your system. It will kill your business. It is the hardest thing to do. Some of you are sitting here going, no, it's not. When you see the hype, we're talking about the hype now. We're talking about the bleeding edge. And this is what I want to pull back from. And later in the talk, we'll do that. Who knows this term? Two pizza team. Where'd it come from? Amazon. I really wish it would have come from like Domino's, because you could say, because they sell pizza. The two pizza team concept is that your team size should be limited to the number of people that can eat 2 pizzas. So for me, it's me and my 14-year-old kid. I mean, but these are the things that are going out. This is the hype. How big's your team? Anybody in here have a team, the developers that doing microservices? So is there like 3 or 4? That's it. You can't be any bigger than that. So in that you got to get good design. You got to get security. So somebody better be a security genius. Although I am of the opinion that security should be outside of the two-pizza team. I want security experts to come in and audit the code and make suggestions and make changes. I don't want a developer like me being responsible for security, because I'm terrible at it. SecOps people are, to me, are gods. But yeah, you gotta have a two-pizza team, man, or you're not cool. You're not cool. This is the hype. Has anybody heard of this? Now there's a thing called micro front ends. This is what's happening with microservices. Now I'm starting to feel the coffee and getting jazzed. This is what's happening with microservices. Someone came along and said, well, we gotta have micro front ends. We can't let the back end people have all the fun. We gotta do micro front ends. Seriously, this is what happens when you start driving down this road with blinders on going, hey, this is great. We're gonna do microservices and we'll do micro front ends. Honest to God, Google this and you'll be like, I don't believe it. This is craziness. And we're not even, meanwhile, on the other side of the fence, anybody heard this term, Majestic Monolith? Anybody a supporter or a fan of the Majestic Monolith? Yes. Are you a Ruby programmer? Are you a Ruby programmer? No. Wow. So, have you ever heard of these guys? Anybody ever heard of them? Sure. So, I'm going to name drop. So, Jason Fried started this company as a friend of mine. So, that's my name drop. So, he and this guy, DHH, if you don't know him, David Hansen, I think is what his name is. He and Jason started this company called Basecamp. Actually, it was called 37 Signals when they started. But now they have a product called Basecamp. It's an online product management product. It's actually really great. It really is fantastic. And they run the company so well, and they've made hundreds of $millions. In fact, nothing to do with this, but DHH had a one-off Italian sports car built. I think it's a Koenigsegg, I don't remember the name of it. But he had it made into a convertible. He paid $3 million for this car. And he can't bring it to the States, so he bought a place in Italy so he could fly over there and drive his car. This is when you've got internet millions. They did, this whole thing runs on Ruby on Rails because David invented Ruby on Rails. The whole thing, the whole site, scaled up to millions of users, runs on Ruby on Rails. It's a monolith. No microservices, almost no downtime. 100%, their customer satisfaction's gotta be close to 100%. They're an incredible company. They're doing all this stuff, and it works. So while you're fighting with microservices and the data part, which, oh my gosh, I'll get to, they're making hundreds of $millions using Ruby on Rails running a monolith. So tell me how great microservices are. And they're very successful, and they say, David wrote a blog post called The Majestic Monolith, and how great it is, and it's easy to maintain because one, they have one code base that's everything, and every developer that goes into it knows something about the code base. They're not over here like, okay, this is what I know. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, something broke. I don't know that, I just know this. They go into the code, they all know the code, they're all comfortable with it. They have standards they keep up, they all can work with each other. Although I will say this is a really cool microservices story. There's an application, I don't even know if it's still around, called Wunderlist, and it runs on microservices. This is a to-do list. 200 microservices for a to-do list. And Microsoft bought them. And I saw an interview with the creator of the company. And it really is a cool story, though. He said they had one piece written in, not Kotlin. What's another language that starts with K? Anybody? What's that? Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's say it was Kotlin. So they had one microservice written in Kotlin, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and it broke. Something broke. And they couldn't get a hold of the developer, first mistake, that was responsible for it. So they woke up a C# developer and said, go look at this. And he opened it, he goes, I don't know this language. So in 15 minutes, he rewrote it in C#. That's the beauty of microservices, the fact that they should be so small and easy to understand that, you know what, I'll just rewrite it in my language. And boom, it's back up and running. That's pretty cool. But 200 microservices for a to-do list. But it works. I'm not knocking there. And with the example I gave you is that's what's supposed to happen with microservices. That's a good implementation of it. But these guys are doing a monolith and making a lot of money. So you don't need that's good. Oh man, they're in trouble. Anybody know the strangler pattern? Now we have this. Well, we have a monolith. Well, then what you need to do is you need to implement the strangler pattern. That's where you take your monolith application, and every time you want to add a function, you don't add a function, you hang a microservice off to the side. And then you do another one, and you do another one. Eventually, they are to strangle the monolith. The monolith becomes, in relation to the size of the application, the monolith, it doesn't get smaller in code base, but it looks smaller because you diagram, the microservices start branching out so big, you have to scale things down, right? You have to zoom out. So the application starts looking smaller. That's called a strangler pattern. That's where the closest I could get was they stab it with their steely knives, but they just can't kill the beast. They can't kill the monolith, so you just kind of strangle it. This is the kind of talk and ideas we get with microservices now. Oh, we'll put the strangler pattern on it. That's great. Anybody familiar with this? Like 50 years ago, Apollo, they used Fortran, they used COBOL and what's called a copybook. Anybody ever heard that? A copybook in COBOL is /copy, and it brings code in. We went to the moon with Fortran and COBOL copybooks. And it was a monolith application. I know everybody likes to point to, oh, we went to the moon with, but it is true. Okay, I mean, let's not forget that it does work. You can do things that aren't microservices and they will work. Just don't forget that. Don't buy into the, we need to do microservices because that's what you need to do. 1981. I have no idea why it's on there. I don't have my notes. Yeah, so there's 1981. Great. Something happened in 1981, and it was monumental. Okay, what about data? Data is the part that microservices, again, that no one wants to talk about. I have to jump ahead and back. No, but, yeah, okay. I want to make sure I'm on the right sequence. No one wants to talk about data. It's really hard. If you're doing microservices and you're handling data correctly, you're doing it wrong. From the hype standpoint, I want you to understand what I'm saying. The hype, the way you do microservices is so difficult that my colleague had to write a book about it. And you know what the start of the book is? That's the first sentence. Code is easy, data is hard. A book about, so before this book came out, obviously none of us were doing anything with data, right? How did we manage all these years without this book? It's impossible. How do I evolve my monolithic legacy database? Has anybody ever done that? Have you ever updated a database? Well, obviously we didn't because we didn't have this book, right? Dealing with a relational database when migrating from monolith to microservice. What? I'm going away from my relational database? Decentralized data management, the one key microservice characteristic. Seriously? I'm throwing away SQL Server. Hallelujah. I can't wait to get into banking when I don't have transactions anymore. I'm going to take money out of the ATM and then pull the plug before it updates, my balance. So that's great. This is the religion of microservices. Again, if you're not doing this, that's fine. If you're saying that's stupid, I agree. This is the hype, and this is what we need to kill. One data store per microservice. One data store per microservice. So here, yes, this is awesome. Your application doesn't talk to a database. It has a RESTful API for admin and one for orders and booking. This would be several microservices. Actually, this is really big. Who did this? And then you got, well, these data capture and event handlers, and then you have to distribute it and replicate it, and you have Elastic over here because you're looking stuff up. And so that's great because it's distributed, so, it might not be consistent. It will, what they call eventual consistency, right? That's a term. Eventually it'll catch up. I'm getting on a plane and I'm in seat 17A. Okay, cool. I go back, actually C, because I always get the aisle. I sit down 17C. No, right before I got on, I went up to the counter. I said, hey, can I get it? Do you have an aisle seat? She goes, yeah, we have 17C. So, okay. She switches on the computer, prints me a new boarding pass. I get on, I get in 17C. 2 minutes later, a woman comes up. You're in my seat. I'm like, nope, I'm in 17C. She gets out her boarding pass. So am I. Hallelujah for eventual consistency. We had the same seat because even though she updated the computer, it didn't get back to here yet because we're running over the internet and something clogged it up, or I don't know. I mean, because it's a microservice, it's okay. It doesn't affect anything. Well, it does when you're in a seat and somebody else wants to sit in it. That's what you have to live with in microservices. You have to accept that as part of your life. That's just the way it is. It just is. It is. You can argue all day, but this can take time. Things can break. In fact, in a proper system with event handlers, the idea is any part can break and your system keeps going. That's great. So you're running right along, and this is working, and we're processing orders, and we're doing all this stuff. And meanwhile, they're over here searching for stuff. That's not here. It's not here. They're both in 17C. And this is. Anybody else remember, like, you create a database, you get a connection string, and it works? Nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Anybody know what this is? You're so blessed if you don't. In distributed processing, you have what's called a database saga. Now you have to write sagas for your database. What does that mean? Look it up. It means that we are now writing transactions. Cod and date, the guys that started relational database are rolling over in their graves, or if they're not dead, they're pulling their hair out. All the work that went in relational databases for two-phase commits, right? So you could do a bunch of updates and then commit them all at once. Nope, we're not doing that now. We're writing database sagas. They're, how you pronounce it, idempotent. So you can just run it again and again. Do you know how hard that is to do that? It's next to impossible. And that's where you're going to fall. You're going to have updates that don't get committed equally. If you follow this hype, you got to do this. This is database saga. This is what you have to do. How about this? Distributed design, right? With triple D, distributed. Say again? Thank you. Domain-driven design, right? I was thinking diners, drive-ins, and dives. So in domain-driven design, you have to have a bounded context over a domain that uses ubiquitous language. Nobody talks like that. Developers don't go, well, what's our bounded context? And we need to get a hold of the ubiquitous language. Nobody talks like that, not unless they read this and went, oh, I'm going to sound smart now and I'm going to ask for a raise. In which case, it's not a bad idea. So bounded context means your microservice serves one thing, and that's your context, and it's bounded. You don't go out of bounds, right? So, and ubiquitous language means there's a language for just that context. So like the word run, what does that mean to you? Does it mean run, right? Does it mean, well, no one wears them anymore, but a run in your stocking? Or when I worked at the paper mill, a run was the process of the beginning to the end till they got the roll of paper. That was a run, so it was a noun. So you would run the machine to get a run of paper. Same word, two different meanings. That's what the ubiquitous language means. There has to be a language. I couldn't go in and say, well, we can't use the word run because that's a verb, so we're going to call it, what should we call it? A sequence, a production. And the guys on the shop floor are like, we don't call it that, it's a run. Do you see what I'm saying? So in microservices, you have to use their language. Wrong end. I already talked about pets versus livestock and what we're doing with VMs now. Now VMs are like, oh, we got to have them. Here's where we're going. We started with physical. Some of you are still there, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't ever think there's anything wrong with it. Good luck updating it, and like when it crashes and stuff, but if it works, it works. Then we went to virtual, then we went to cloud. Then we went to containers. That wasn't enough. Then we had to go to Docker, which means you manage it with Kubernetes. Now we have this thing called Istio Service Mesh to manage Kubernetes, which it's actually really slick. So what's next? What's next? The next thing is going to be an application that takes all your microservices and presents them as a monolith. That's my prediction. That is my prediction. And I will bet you American dollars that that'll happen. I guarantee someone's doing that right now, working on it. I guarantee it. In fact, oh my gosh, Kiali is a tool that runs with Istio, and one of the things it has is a dashboard that does exactly that. It shows all your microservices linked together and transactions flowing between them. It presents it like, here's your application as one unit. Oh my gosh, I'm a prophet. How many shops in here are polyglots? Polyglot. A few, okay. How many of you are more than 2 languages? Okay. Well, there's one guy here who's like really doing microservices, and I think he's doing it right, so I'm impressed. Or I feel sorry for you. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. This is the guy that's going to beat me up afterwards. But one of the things in microservices, like, it's great for polyglots because like you can hire whoever you want. They can program in C# or Node or Go or Python. It's great. Then you go out and talk to shops. Like, what are you? C#. What are you? We're a Node. We're Python shop. How many other languages? None. Oh, so what's the advantage? The idea is supposed to be you could hire the best person for the, right? And they write it in the language that they're familiar. But the fact is there aren't that many polyglot shops. So much doom and gloom. Here's the takeaway from the meeting, the talk, and I'll get into some detail. Embrace what you can use. I'm done ranting, now I'm gonna actually instruct a little bit. Embrace what you can use, or I should say encourage. Don't throw out every microservices just because there's so much crap hype, and there is. If you follow these things to the end that the extremes lead you to, you'll just be like, forget it. I'm not doing any of this stuff. Because it gets really crazy. It really does. Database sagas alone should scare you away. But use what you can. So first thing to get to where you're doing microservices or that type of thing is, the first thing is you have to have a DevOps culture. I'm going to take you down a path now of how to get there. If you come into work Tuesday morning and say, hey, let's do microservices. And they're like, okay, what do we do? The first thing you have to have in a company, you have to have the right culture. There has to be a cultural shift. If you're working for, I was talking to someone last night, they work for a big bank. I won't say the name of Citibank, but they work for them, and they were saying how they're just like stuck in this mentality and they can't do stuff that they want to do. The culture has to be one of trusting developers, trusting operations, having developers and operations not hate each other but work together. If you were at my workshop yesterday, when you develop microservices and that, and you're working with Kubernetes, you're writing scripts, you're developing YAML files. Those you can turn over to operations and say, hey, this works. So you guys are free to take it and add to it or whatever and make it better. That's a DevOps culture, but you have to have the culture. The company has to be willing to let you do that. And most places, if that does work, this is where most companies stop. Your developers have to have an ability to get elastic on-demand infrastructure. What does that mean? That means you go to your developers and you say, here's your corporate credit card. You can get a server on Azure or Amazon whenever you want to, or it's an account, whatever you do. We trust you to spin up servers. We also trust you not to let them run 24/7 for the whole month. Spin it up in the morning and shut it down at night if you can. We trust you to do that. That's going to cost us $500 a month per developer. Yep, it is. Deal with it. If you're not willing to do that, then you should not get into microservices. If you can't trust your developers with infrastructure, they're writing your code. You realize they can write code that can like destroy your company. You know what I mean? Like they're writing executables, so you're already trusting them with everything.
That's the cheapest 500 you can spend.
Mm-hmm. It is. And if you can't do that, go buy some servers and install OpenStack. It's free, and it works. Pretty much. No, it actually does work. It's a hassle to install, it's a pain, but you know how companies are. We're not gonna spend that money, we're gonna do it ourselves. We're gonna spend 3 times as much to do it ourselves, but we didn't write a check to Amazon. We're so smart. But you gotta have this, you have to have this. If you're working in a company that won't do this, you're not gonna do microservices well. You might do it, but you're not gonna do it well. And I would say, in my 40 years of experience, if you're working with a company that doesn't do this, if you need to do this, but you're not, in other words, not everybody needs to do this. But if you're in a company where you're like, man, if I could just use Amazon, I could get so much more done, and they won't do it, that's a good time to call a recruiter. Everything should be automated. Automated. I want to get a t-shirt that just says script everything. You should script as much as you can. if you're a developer, you probably do what I do. I'm working at my desk, and there's a command that I need to run, so I run it. And then I run another command, and that produces an output. Now I change my code, I run that command, I run another command, produces the output. And after about 4 hours, I'm like, why don't I just create a script? Does anybody else do that, or am I the only one that's stupid? Like, I'll write the same commands over and over, and I'm like, duh, I can make this a PowerShell or a bash script and just say, go do this. Oh, it does it. Your mindset should be to automate stuff, everything. You should not be going into SQL database manager and clicking. You should be running a script. You should not be typing data into a database to seed it. You should be running a script. You should always be running scripts. As much as you can, automate everything. Because that will pay off, because when it goes to operations, you're gonna be like, oh, it's automated. That's what operations does. But DevOps, remember? If you're the developer and you need it, operations is gonna need it. You have to have it. I hate to be so dogmatic, have to. In the proper environment for microservices, you need a CI/CD pipeline. You gotta have an automated pipeline. If you don't do that, even if you're not in microservices, this is a phenomenal way to, it's just, how do you live without it? Continuous integration, continuous delivery or deployment. It could mean either one, and they are different. One delivers the software, the other one deploys it, like to production, whatever. So decide which one you want, or both. You have to be able to do it. You should be able to do advanced deployments, canary and blue-green deployments. If you can't do them, you're not going to do microservices well. You can do it, but that's what you want to do. And Kubernetes makes that easier. Istio makes it a nothing to it. If you don't know what they are, Google's your friend. Canary and blue-green deployments. What I'm trying to show you is these are the path to get down to the unicorn stage, if you will. But you can use these things now, right? Forget the hype. Forget the, like, we're not doing microservices, so we can't do this. Yes, you can. Because, by the way, this talk that my former manager, Burr Sutter at Red Hat, he is the Java world, he is a god. When we have our summit every year, he is the lead presenter. This guy is unbelievable. He has a talk called Teaching an Elephant to Dance. I would highly recommend that you search for that and watch the video. It is really, really good when it talks about transitioning from the monolith, doing things the old way, to the new way. So assess. Do you need to scale? Do you really? That's a question. Containers. You can use containers without microservices. This is the big surprise. This is where you don't need the hype. You can use containers. Just put your stuff in containers and use it. Say, well, it's a web service. It doesn't matter. Use it anyway. Just use it. Take advantage of it. Don't let the fact that it's not a microservice. Data. Use your brain. You don't have to, remember that complicated diagram? You know what? We're using SQL Server and it works. Keep using it. Well, microservices, forget that. Take a web service, put it in a container so Kubernetes can scale it, and let it continue talking to the database. You haven't lost anything. You're not going to go to KubeCon and talk to the microservices experts and be like, oh man, we're knocking it out of the park. And they're going to ask you, and you're like, we're doing this. Like, no, that's not microservices. Like, yeah, but we're making money, right? We're doing the job. The software's working. That's all you do. Forget the hype. Do what works. And take it easy. Unlike me, don't get worked up about this stuff. Just, seriously, when you hear stuff come along, use your brain, think about what you need to do, use the best parts, forget the rest. Don't let peer pressure, don't let the latest thing get to you, because in a couple of years, something else is going to come along, and then you're going to be like, I wasted all that time and energy having to do things just perfectly to appease the microservices gods. And what's his name? Who's the guy? I'm drawing up at ThoughtWorks. Who's the ThoughtWorks guy? Martin Fowler. Right. I didn't please Martin Fowler. It doesn't matter. Use what works. Pay-per-call.io. Mark Bates. I met this guy about 3 years ago. And when you go to speak at a conference, I'm here till 10:30, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you go to a conference, here's how it works, if you're not familiar with this. And you should be familiar, because you need to all speak at a conference. They send out what they call it a call for paper or a call for presentations. So you're like, okay, the deadline is April 1st to get your abstracts in. So you give it a title, you try to make it catchy, like let's kill the microservices hype, and then you write a little abstract that says, come hear me rant, and blah, 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 blah. And then you send it off to the organizers. And then they get hundreds of them, and they go through them, and they have a bunch of decision criteria, and then they come back and say, hey, usually they come back and say, we're really sorry we didn't accept your paper. And then you go through the pit of depression, and then you drink too much, and then you get over it. But if they do accept it, then you celebrate and drink too much. So he wrote this website that facilitates that, because it's a pain, because most times you go to a website and you type your personal information, blah, 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 here's my email address and where I work and all this stuff, and you submit it, and you go, I'm gonna submit another talk. You gotta put your email address and where you work. Again, it's a real hassle, and it's discouraging. So he did this thing where you can put in your talks, and then when you go, you can say, oh, here's a conference, and I think I'll apply to it. You go, click, click, click. These 3 talks, done. And then they use that system to contact you. It's really slick. So he decided he was going to do this. He and another guy, do a startup, and Mark's the developer. He said, I started in like September and worked through December doing it with microservices. This is one guy. He said, I decided, microservices is a thing, and I'm going to do it all with microservices. I said, so how'd it go? He goes, 3 months, I didn't have any software delivered. He said, it was so hard. He said, finally, one weekend in December, I sat down with Ruby on Rails and created the whole website. I said, oh, that's cool. He goes, and I run it in Docker. I was like, you run a monolith in Docker. Do you know you're doing it backwards? He's like, yep. The point is, it works. It works well. You don't have to take the hype and go to the nth degree. Embrace the new. Yes, you should embrace what's new. Use it. You're seeing a theme. This is how you kill the hype. And finally, make sure you enjoy it. If you're not enjoying what you do, find something that's fun, because coding is a kick. Any questions? I hope this yes?
So you said that there might be chances that the data might not synchronize or
Right.
something like that.
Yep. There's not chances. It will happen. That's why you have to write a database Saga. But go ahead.
Yeah, but the managers are like, I want the report every hour, what is happening. Like basically that is like almost like it won't sell, right? If you tell a manager, oh, your data will be not in sync, your reports will not be in sync, then they will just almost
Yes. Well, so typically when it's not in sync, we're talking maybe a few seconds, but it could happen. Something can fall over. So you have to accept the fact.
Active Directory is an eventual consistency.
Right.
It works, guys.
Active Directory. In fact,
Active Directory runs the world. It's eventual consistency. There is a right tool for everything. I mean, do you really need a microsecond synchronization across the planet? Not really for every other thing.
yeah, that's the thing. If you're in banking, you have to have commits that happen simultaneously. But otherwise, you probably don't. If your data is a few seconds old or a few minutes old, unless you're tracking a Formula One car around the track, you don't really need everything up to the second. You probably don't. Probably. But that's where you decide. So maybe you do, in which case, you use a SQL Server database and just get a big database.
Here, a few seconds. We're not talking minutes and hours. You're really talking.
Unless you're a huge pharmacy with drug company that they do nightly updates, batch jobs running on a mainframe. I worked there for a while. So you all got your prescription during the day, but they didn't update the database till overnight because they do 30 million updates with an IBM mainframe.
That's why when you call Citibank, transactions are valid as of last night midnight.
Right, yes. So any other questions? I hope this met your expectations, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very much.